What if the person who broke your heart was also the one fate sent back to heal it? On a snowy Christmas Eve, Ethan Carter, a single father just trying to make ends meet, opens his door to find his boss, Claire Donovan, standing in the cold, mascara running down her face and her pride completely gone. The same woman who had fired him, humiliated him, and made him believe kindness was weakness. But that night, something inside him wouldn't let him turn her away. As the snow fell, two lonely souls found warmth in the most unexpected place: each other. What began as one night of compassion soon spiraled into a story of redemption, buried secrets, and a love that defied the scars of their past. Because sometimes, the coldest nights bring the warmest miracles, and sometimes, all it takes is one Christmas to remind us that nobody deserves to be alone. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Vale of Hearts, a place where love finds its way through the quietest corners of the soul. Tonight, let's dive into the story called The Christmas She Wasn't Alone. What kind of man helps the woman who ruined his life? That question echoed inside Noah Bennett's mind as he stared out the frosted window of his tiny Chicago apartment on Christmas Eve. Outside, snow blanketed the streets, softening the world in white. Inside, the scent of cinnamon and gingerbread cookies filled the air. His 9-year-old daughter, Lily, sat cross-legged on the living room floor, humming a carol as she pressed candy buttons onto gingerbread men. It was their little tradition, just the two of them. Ever since his wife had walked out 3 years ago, Christmas had been the one night Noah tried to make feel whole again. No late-night work emails, no phone calls, just peace. At least that was the plan. The buzzing phone on the kitchen counter shattered it. Once, twice, 5 times in a row. Noah sighed, wiping his hands on a dish towel before glancing at the screen. The name flashing there made his stomach clench. Madison Clark, his boss. The woman who could turn a boardroom silent with a single look. Brilliant, ruthless, perfectly composed. And somehow the most exhausting person he'd ever worked for. She had a reputation for breaking people down until they either quit or became her reflection. Noah had spent 3 years surviving her impossible deadlines and colder silences, all for the sake of Lily and a paycheck that kept the lights on. He locked the phone and walked back toward the couch. Lily looked up with her big brown eyes. "Who keeps calling, Daddy?" He forced a smile. "No one important, sweetheart." But then the phone buzzed again. Not a call this time, just a message. One short trembling sentence that made his pulse quicken. "Please, help me," Noah frowned. That wasn't Madison's tone. She didn't ask. She demanded. He hesitated for a long moment, staring at the glowing words like they might disappear. Maybe it was a mistake or some twisted prank, but deep down, something told him it wasn't. He exhaled slowly, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "Lily," he said softly, crouching to her level. "Can you stay with Mrs. Jenkins for a bit? Daddy has to go help someone," she pouted. "But it's Christmas Eve." "I know," he whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'll be back before you wake up, promise." 30 minutes later, Noah's car rolled to a stop outside a dimly lit bar downtown. The Velvet Lounge, a place for executives to unwind after crushing others' dreams. Through the haze of snow, he spotted her, Madison Clark. She sat on the curb in front of the bar, wearing a crimson silk dress far too thin for the freezing night. Her heels were kicked off beside her, her once perfect hair falling in tangled curls over her shoulders. Mascara streaked her cheeks like black rivers on porcelain skin. For a heartbeat, Noah wondered if he was dreaming. The bartender stood at the doorway, arms crossed, shaking his head. "She tried to drive," he muttered when Noah approached. "I took her keys. She's been sitting there for 20 minutes. Noah swallowed hard, his breath clouding in the air. "I'll take her home." Madison turned at the sound of his voice. For the first time in years, her eyes didn't look sharp or calculating. They looked scared. "Broken, Noah," she whispered, her voice rough from tears. I didn't know who else to call. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in his throat. All the anger, all the resentment, melted beneath the simple truth of her voice. She wasn't a boss tonight. She wasn't a tyrant. She was just human. "Come on," he said finally, wrapping his coat around her trembling shoulders. "Let's get you home." As he helped her into the car, Madison clung to his sleeve, whispering something under her breath that he couldn't quite catch. Snow swirled through the night, glittering in the headlights like falling stars. Noah drove in silence, his mind a storm of memories. The nights she'd humiliated him in meetings. The mornings she'd sent him home with exhaustion and frustration. Yet beside him she was small, quiet, almost childlike. Every time she shivered, he turned the heater higher. When they reached her building, a glass tower that overlooked the frozen river, Madison could barely walk. He steadied her, guiding her through the lobby as the doorman raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Inside her penthouse, everything gleamed with sterile perfection. White walls, silver furniture, no warmth, no photos, no life. It looked like a place meant for showing off, not for living. Madison sank onto the couch, staring blankly at the floor. "It's my mother's birthday," she murmured. "She died 5 years ago tonight." Noah stood there, unsure what to say. "I'm sorry." She smiled weakly, but her eyes were glassy. "You shouldn't be. You should hate me." He hesitated, then knelt to set a glass of water on the table beside her. "Maybe I should," he said quietly, "but not tonight." She looked up, confusion flickering across her face. "Because no one deserves to be alone on Christmas," he added. For a long moment, they just sat there, two people who had every reason to despise each other, yet somehow found comfort in the silence between them. Noah didn't know it then, but the moment he lifted her into his car, as the snow fell gently onto her shaking hands, was the exact moment both their hearts began to thaw. Snow swirled harder as Noah tightened his grip on the steering wheel. The wipers fought to keep the windshield clear, but the storm had turned the city into a blur of white. Madison sat slumped in the passenger seat, her head resting against the glass, eyes half open but unfocused. The silence between them was deafening, broken only by the soft hum of the heater and the occasional sound of her unsteady breath. He hadn't planned any of this. An hour ago, he was decorating cookies with his daughter. Now he was driving his intoxicated boss through a blizzard, wondering why the hell he couldn't just walk away. When they'd left the Velvet Lounge, the air outside was brutal. A small crowd had gathered, a few bar patrons, and worse, 2 paparazzi who recognized Madison Clark immediately. The flashes came fast, cutting through the snow like lightning. "Hey, isn't that Madison Clark?" one of them shouted. "Looks like someone had too much Christmas cheer tonight." Noah's stomach dropped. Madison flinched, shielding her face with trembling hands. "Please," she whispered, her voice raw. Without thinking, Noah stepped in front of her, blocking the camera lenses with his body. "Enough," he snapped. "Back off." "She's not your story tonight," the men laughed, ignoring him. One of them leaned forward, aiming for a closer shot. Instinct took over. Noah grabbed the guy's wrist and pushed him back just enough to make a point. Not violent, but firm. "Delete it," he said, his tone steady, calm, the kind that came from a man with nothing left to lose. The paparazzo hesitated, muttered something under his breath, and finally lowered the camera. Noah helped Madison into the car, pulling the door shut just as another gust of snow whipped past them. For a brief second, the world outside disappeared, the flashes, the noise, the judgment, leaving only the sound of her quiet sob against the hum of the engine. Now, as the city lights blurred into streaks of gold, Noah tried not to look at her. He focused on the road, on the rhythmic tap of the turn signal, on anything except the fact that Madison Clark, the woman who once accused him of being too soft for leadership, was crying beside him. "You shouldn't have come," she murmured suddenly, her voice barely audible. He glanced at her. "You texted me." A small, humorless laugh escaped her lips. "I didn't think you'd actually answer." He almost told her he didn't know why he had. But instead he said, "Everyone deserves help sometimes." Madison's eyes fluttered shut again. Her words came out in fragments, soaked with exhaustion. "You don't get it, Noah. People like me don't get saved." He didn't respond. There wasn't anything to say. Some walls were too tall to tear down with words. A few minutes later, she began to mumble, at first incoherently, then with a name that made his chest tighten. Mom, I'm sorry. Her voice cracked on the last word, a sound so fragile it felt wrong to hear it. He didn't know what to do. Comfort her? Pretend he didn't hear? He just gripped the wheel harder. She passed away, didn't she? He asked gently. Madison didn't answer, but tears rolled silently down her face. When they reached her apartment building, one of those glass towers that overlooked the frozen Chicago River, Noah parked in the private garage. The place looked expensive enough to make him uncomfortable. He got out, walked around to her side, and opened the door. I can walk, she murmured, though her legs wobbled the second she tried. I know, he said quietly, catching her before she fell. Let me help. They made their way through the lobby. The night doorman gave a look that was half curious, half knowing, the kind of look that made Noah want to explain himself. But he didn't. He just nodded, guiding Madison into the elevator. When they reached her floor, the penthouse opened into silence. No warmth, no holiday lights, no sign of life, just white marble, stainless steel, and the faint echo of loneliness. He helped her to the couch, taking in the perfect lines and spotless surfaces of the apartment. You don't even have a Christmas tree, he muttered, more to himself than to her. Madison gave a small, bitter smile. Never saw the point, he didn't argue. Instead, he found a blanket draped over a chair and gently laid it across her shoulders. She stared ahead, expression unreadable. Why did you help me? She asked finally, voice trembling. You could have left me there and no one would have blamed you. Noah hesitated. His reflection shimmered faintly in the floor-to-ceiling windows. A man who looked tired, lost, and yet soft around the edges, because it was the right thing to do, he said simply. Her eyes glistened. You always were too good for this world. Or maybe just stupid enough to still believe in people. He tried to smile, but it came out sad. She turned her gaze away, tears falling freely now. You don't know what it's like to have everything you worked for mean nothing. To be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone. Noah knelt down, resting the glass of water he'd poured onto the table beside her. I know more than you think, he said quietly. Madison looked at him for a long moment, the kind of look that seemed to search for truth beneath the surface. But before she could speak again, exhaustion overtook her. Her head dropped back against the couch. Get some rest, he murmured. She nodded faintly, her eyes already closing. Merry Christmas, Noah. He stood there for a while, watching the steady rhythm of her breathing. For the first time, he saw not the powerful CEO, not the woman who'd humiliated him in front of clients, but someone human, flawed, grieving, lost. He draped the blanket higher around her shoulders, then turned toward the door. Outside, snow drifted silently past the windows, glowing under the streetlights. As Noah stepped into the cold, the wind stung his face, sharp, honest, real. He took a deep breath, looked up at the sky, and thought of Lily, asleep at home, her stocking hanging by the fireplace. He had missed the one night he promised to spend with her, the only night that mattered. Yet somehow he couldn't bring himself to regret it. Because deep down, he knew this night would change everything, for both of them. The morning came softly, pale light slipping through the floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off untouched marble. For a moment, Madison Clark didn't move. Her head throbbed faintly, her throat dry, and her body heavy with the weight of a night she couldn't quite remember. All she could hear was the distant hum of the city below, muffled by the steady fall of snow. When she finally stirred, the first thing she noticed wasn't the hangover. It was the warmth around her neck. A gray knitted scarf, worn, soft, faintly scented with pine and something familiar. She frowned, fingers tracing the weave. It wasn't hers. Madison never wore anything that wasn't designer. Then, slowly, the fog in her mind began to lift. The cold pavement, the flashes, the man's steady voice cutting through the chaos. Noah Bennett. Memories surfaced in fragments. The car ride, his quiet hand steadying her, The way he didn't say a single cruel thing when she practically collapsed in front of him. Shame prickled at her skin. She'd seen pity before, but never from him. And somehow that made it worse. She sat up carefully. Her shoes were lined neatly by the door. A glass of water rested on the coffee table beside a folded note, written in firm, neat handwriting. You were safe. Merry Christmas. That was all. No name, no accusation, no trace of judgment. Madison stared at it for a long time. She could almost hear his voice in her head. Calm, grounded, maddeningly kind. It unsettled her in a way she couldn't explain. Her apartment was silent, but not the peaceful kind. It was the heavy, echoing silence of a place no one really lived in. The bottle of red wine she'd opened the night before sat half-finished on the counter. A thin layer of dust covered the grand piano she hadn't played since her mother's funeral. And then, she saw it. The Christmas tree. It stood tall in the corner of the living room, perfectly decorated by the interior designer weeks ago. White lights, silver ornaments, flawless symmetry. The one imperfection, it was unplugged. Always had been. Madison had walked past that tree every day without glancing at it once. To her, it was nothing but a prop, a reminder of a holiday she no longer celebrated. A holiday she'd buried 5 years ago, along with the only person who had ever loved her unconditionally. But this morning felt different. Maybe it was the faint smell of his cologne still lingering in the air. Or maybe it was the note, those 4 words that carried more warmth than any luxury she'd surrounded herself with. You were safe. Her hand hovered over the plug for a moment. Ridiculous, she thought. It's just a string of lights. But her fingers trembled as she reached down, pressing it into the socket. The lights flickered once, then came to life, soft, golden, almost hesitant, as if they, too, hadn't expected to be turned on. The glow filled the room, touching the walls, the ornaments, and finally her face. Something inside her cracked. Madison sank onto the couch, pulling the scarf closer around her. She tried to remember the last time she'd felt anything close to this. Safety, gratitude, maybe even hope. But her memory came up empty. For years, she'd built her life around control. Control over her image, her company, her emotions. Control had kept her sharp, untouchable, successful. It had also kept her utterly alone. Her gaze drifted to the note again. You were safe. Simple. Human. No one had said that to her since her mother died. She thought of Noah. The quiet way he looked at people. The patience in his voice. The way he didn't flinch at her brokenness. How had she missed that all this time? She'd spent 3 years barking orders at him, dismissing his ideas, cutting him off mid-sentence. And still, last night, he'd shown up. Her phone buzzed. A new message. Lily. Merry Christmas, Ms. Clark. Daddy said you weren't feeling well. I hope you get better soon. We saved you a cookie. Madison stared at the screen, stunned. Lily, Noah's daughter. She remembered meeting her once. A bright, curious girl who'd come to the office with a lunchbox and a sketchbook full of drawings. Madison had barely said 2 words to her. Now, that same child had just sent her the first Merry Christmas she'd received in years. She felt the sting behind her eyes before she could stop it. A tear slid down her cheek, then another, until she was laughing softly through the tears, shaking her head. What's happening to me? She whispered. She wiped her face quickly, embarrassed even though no one was there to see. Her gaze went back to the tree. The lights reflected faintly in her eyes, softening them. For the first time in 5 years, Madison Clark didn't feel like the woman everyone feared. She just felt human, flawed, tired, maybe even ready to be something else. She picked up her phone again, typing a single message before she could second-guess herself. Madison. Thank you. For last night, her thumb hovered over the send button. Then, with a deep breath, she pressed it. The message sent. Simple. Uncertain. But it was a start. As the snow continued to fall outside, the glow from the Christmas tree washed over the room, chasing away the gray shadows that had lived there too long, and for a fleeting moment, the cold, quiet world of Madison Clark didn't feel so cold anymore. The following morning arrived wrapped in silver clouds and the hum of city traffic. The world had moved on from Christmas, but for Madison Clark, something inside her hadn't. She felt off balance, as though a single thread had been tugged from the perfect tapestry she'd spent years weaving. That scarf still hung around her neck as she left the apartment, a detail she didn't even notice until the elevator's mirrored wall reflected it back at her. It looked out of place against her tailored black coat. Out of place, yet somehow right. When she entered the sleek lobby of Clark & Kerber Marketing, conversations halted like someone had cut the sound. Normally, Madison's arrival was a storm, heels striking against the marble, eyes sharp, words sharper. Today, she moved slower. Her expression was softer, her steps quieter. Even the receptionist blinked twice before managing a faint, "Good morning, Ms. Clark." She gave a small nod. "Morning." Her voice, for once, wasn't clipped or commanding. On the 24th floor, the team was already gathered around their desks, pretending not to stare as she walked past. Phones buzzed, keyboards clicked, but every ear was tuned to her footsteps. Madison ignored them, or tried to. She focused on the one desk halfway down the hall, where Noah Bennett sat reviewing a proposal. His hair was slightly damp, as though he'd rushed out after dropping Lily at school. He looked up when he felt her presence. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Madison extended a hand, holding a paper cup. "Coffee," she said simply. "Black, 1 sugar, right?" The office went dead silent. Someone dropped a pen. Noah blinked, unsure whether it was a trap or a dream. Yes, thank you." She gave a small nod and walked away without another word, leaving behind a wake of stunned whispers. "What just happened?" someone hissed. "Did Madison Clark just bring him coffee?" "She never brings anyone anything, not even herself." Noah sat back in his chair, feeling the weight of 100 eyes on him. He didn't understand it either. The woman he'd helped last night, fragile, lost, human, didn't exist in this fluorescent office. Or at least she wasn't supposed to. Yet somehow she did. Later that morning, the weekly executive meeting began. Madison entered the glass conference room last, a tablet in one hand, coffee in the other. The board members straightened immediately, their smiles sharp, rehearsed. Noah took his usual seat near the end of the table, silently praying for an uneventful hour. It didn't last. Halfway through the meeting, Mr. Langford, one of the senior partners, leaned forward with that self-satisfied smirk that made Noah's skin crawl. "I reviewed the holiday campaign analytics," he said, glancing at Madison, but aiming the jab elsewhere. Bennett's creative direction was a miss. Too sentimental. Our clients expect sophistication, not bedtime stories. The old Madison would have agreed. She'd built her career on sharpness, not sentiment. But today she didn't even look at Langford. She looked at Noah, quiet, calm, holding her gaze with the same patience he always had. "I disagree," she said finally. The room froze. Langford's smirk faltered. "Excuse me?" Madison set her coffee down gently. The campaign performed better than expected with family-oriented brands. "The numbers show emotional engagement up 30%. Langford frowned. "Still, it's effective," she cut in, her tone steady but firm. "Sometimes emotion connects where strategy can't." Noah tried not to stare, but disbelief flickered across his face. Madison Clark, the woman who once told him emotion was a luxury for people who can afford to fail, had just offended him. When the meeting ended, the air was thick with speculation. Madison gathered her notes, ignoring the puzzled looks around her. "Bennett," she said, her voice softer now. "A word?" Noah followed her into her office. The door clicked shut behind them. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence felt heavier here, surrounded by glass walls and city skyline. Madison set her tablet down, turning to face him. Her expression was unreadable, a mix of exhaustion and something else, something he couldn't name. "I remember everything," she said quietly. Noah froze. "You do?" She nodded, eyes lowering to the floor. "The bar, the drive, the things I said." Her voice trembled slightly, just enough to betray the effort it took to keep it steady. You could have left me there. God knows I deserved it. Why didn't you? Noah hesitated. He wasn't used to seeing her like this, vulnerable, searching. He took a slow breath before answering, because no one deserves to be alone on Christmas. The words hung in the air between them, simple yet heavier than either expected. Madison's lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Her gaze flickered to the window, to the snow still falling faintly beyond the glass. For a long time, she said nothing. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. You make it sound so easy. It's not, Noah said. But sometimes, we get one chance to be better than we were yesterday. Her eyes met his again, blue and stormy, full of a conflict she couldn't disguise. I don't even know how to start. Maybe, he said gently. You just did. Silence again. But this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of questions, of things neither dared to say aloud. Madison looked away first. You should go. I'm sure you've got better things to do than play therapist to your boss. Noah smiled faintly. Not today. It's a slow morning. That earned him the smallest curve of her lips. Not quite a smile, but something close. Go before I change my mind. He nodded and turned toward the door. As his hand touched the handle, she spoke again, softer now. Noah? He glanced back. Thank you, she said. The sincerity in her tone caught him off guard. You're welcome, he replied, almost too quietly. When he left, Madison sank into her chair, staring out at the skyline. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar spreading through her chest. Not control, not pride, but peace. Outside, the snow kept falling, blanketing the city in quiet white. And somewhere between guilt and gratitude, a storm began to stir inside her, the kind that didn't destroy, but changed everything it touched. The next 48 hours shattered whatever fragile peace had begun to form between them. It started with a notification, a single ping that spread like wildfire. Someone had captured blurry photos outside the Velvet Lounge. Madison Clark, the famously untouchable CEO, in a crimson dress, leaning against Noah Bennett, who looked every bit the reluctant savior. The angle was suggestive, his arm steadying her, her head tilted against his chest. The caption read, Scandal at Clark & Co. CEO caught in intimate moment with her employee. By morning, the story was everywhere. Blogs, news sites, even business journals that usually avoided gossip headlines were running it under the guise of corporate ethics discussion. The internet didn't care about truth. It cared about spectacle. And Madison Clark, the woman who had built an empire on control, had suddenly lost all of it. When she arrived at the office that day, her assistant's face said everything, pale, shaken, avoiding eye contact. They're waiting for you in the boardroom, she whispered. The room was tense. Men in suits, women with cold expressions, all pretending to be professional while devouring her like vultures. Madison took her seat, shoulders square. Mr. Langford spoke first, of course. This is unacceptable, he said, waving a printed photo as if she hadn't seen it 100 times already. We're receiving complaints from clients. The board expects a statement. Madison's voice was calm. The photo is misleading. Mr. Bennett was helping me after an incident outside the venue. Langford scoffed. And yet, it looks intimate. You know how perception works, Ms. Clark. You've built your career on it. Her jaw tightened. Perception isn't truth. Tell that to our investors. She didn't flinch. I will. But before she could speak again, another voice cut in, softer, almost hesitant. Madison, said Elena Price, the company's legal advisor, the best course of action may be for Mr. Bennett to take a temporary leave while things settle. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Noah, sitting silently at the far end of the table, looked up. You're suspending me? It's not a suspension, Elena said carefully. Just a cooling period to protect the company. And Miss Clark, he almost laughed. Right, to protect her. Madison's hands curled into fists under the table. No, she said sharply. He did nothing wrong. You can't punish someone for helping me. Langford leaned back, smirking. This isn't punishment, Madison. It's damage control. And with that, the decision was made. Efficient, corporate, merciless. By the afternoon, the whispers had turned into open stares. When Noah packed his things, no one spoke to him. A few offered sympathetic looks. Most didn't dare. He didn't look up. He didn't need to. The shame pressed down like a physical weight. Back at home, his daughter Lily was waiting with Coco and a drawing she'd made, the three of them standing under a Christmas tree, smiling. "Daddy, did your boss like the cookies?" she asked, hopeful. Noah's throat tightened. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said softly. She did. Madison, meanwhile, was crumbling beneath a different kind of pressure. Every headline carved at her reputation: Ice Queen's meltdown. Power, scandal, and the fall of Madison Clark. Her PR team flooded her inbox with damage management drafts, all hollow, all cruelly detached. She deleted every one of them. By midnight, she sat alone in her dark office, staring at the glowing skyline. For years, she'd lived for this view, proof of everything she'd built. But tonight, it only made her feel small. Her phone buzzed. A message from Noah. "Noah, don't let them break you. They'll move on in a week." She stared at the screen, tears stinging her eyes. She wanted to reply, to apologize, but her fingers hovered helplessly over the keys. What could she possibly say? "I'm sorry you lost your job because of me. I'm sorry I dragged you into my mess." The next evening, she drove to his apartment without thinking. The building was modest, the kind of place she'd never set foot in before. She found him outside, sitting on the stoop, watching the snow fall. He looked up, surprised, but not angry. "Just tired. You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "I had to," she replied. Her breath came out in misty clouds. "They suspended you because of me," he shrugged. "It's fine. I'll find something else." "It's not fine," she snapped. "You've worked for this company for years. You earned your place. And now people think I slept with my boss," he finished for her. "Yeah, I noticed," Madison winced. "I'm sorry." Noah studied her for a long moment. "You didn't take those pictures." "But I caused them," she said, voice breaking. "I was reckless. I was selfish. I made you lose everything. Your job, your reputation." He stood up, cutting her off. "You think I care about that?" She blinked. "You should." "I care about what my daughter thinks," he said, his voice low, steady. "I care that she sees her dad as someone who stands up for what's right. And if that means protecting someone who's falling apart, then fine. I'll take the hit." Madison stared at him, her heart pounding. "Why, after everything I did to you?" "Because," he said softly, "I don't want Lily to grow up thinking kindness makes you weak, or that walking away from someone who's hurting makes you strong." Something inside her shattered. The words lodged deep, painful, honest, undeserved. She looked away, trying to keep her composure, but it was useless. Her voice came out trembling. "You don't understand. You didn't just save me that night. You saved me from myself." He froze. Madison took a shaky breath. "I've spent my whole life trying to be perfect, untouchable. Because the moment I let anyone close, they left. Or worse, they watched me fall, but you didn't." For a moment, all he could do was look at her. The city lights flickered across her face. The same face that had once terrified entire boardrooms, now stripped bare, raw, human. He stepped closer, close enough to see the tears she wasn't hiding anymore. "Madison," she shook her head. "Don't. I just needed you to know." He hesitated, then spoke softly. "Maybe the world's wrong about you. Maybe they always were." She let out a trembling laugh. "You're the only one who thinks that. Then maybe that's enough." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full, heavy, alive. The kind of silence that says everything words can't. Above them, the snow began to fall again. Quiet, relentless, covering the city in white. Neither of them moved. Because in that fragile, impossible moment, surrounded by a world that refused to understand them, two broken people finally saw each other clearly. Snow drifted lazily through the gray morning sky, soft flakes tumbling onto the city like scattered whispers. It had been 3 days since the scandal broke. 3 days since Madison Clark had stood in front of Noah Bennett's apartment, her heart breaking and healing in the same breath. Since then, neither of them had spoken. He'd gone quiet, choosing silence over the noise of public opinion. She, on the other hand, had done the one thing no one expected from her. She'd disappeared. No press statements, no dramatic denials, no strategic damage control, just stillness until now. When Noah opened his door that Saturday morning, he expected a neighbor, or maybe a delivery. What he didn't expect was her, standing there on his porch in a long camel coat, a red scarf wrapped around her neck, and a bakery box tucked nervously in her hands. For a second, neither spoke. The snow fell between them, gentle but relentless, and all he could do was stare. "Madison," he said finally, his voice caught between surprise and disbelief. "What are you doing here?" She looked uncertain, almost shy. 2 words that had never belonged to her before. I brought something." She held up the box like proof. "Gingerbread cookies and, a few gifts," he blinked. "For me?" She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "For Lily, actually. Though there might be 1 or 2 for you. Depends on how generous I feel." It wasn't much of a joke, but it was the first time he'd seen her smile in weeks. And it wasn't the kind that came with sharp edges. He stepped aside. "Come in before you freeze." She exhaled softly, relieved, and stepped into the warmth. The air smelled like cinnamon and vanilla, the kind of cozy chaos only a child's presence could create. Lily appeared in the hallway a moment later, her hair messy, still wearing pajamas covered in cartoon reindeer. "Daddy, who's—" Her eyes widened when she saw Madison. "You're the lady from the picture." Noah's stomach dropped, but before he could say anything, Lily gasped. "Are you Mrs. Claus?" Madison blinked. "What?" Lily giggled. "You're wearing red and you brought cookies. Only Mrs. Claus does that." For a moment there was silence, and then Madison laughed. Really laughed. It wasn't the polite, calculated laugh she used in boardrooms. It was soft, unguarded, like something long forgotten had cracked open inside her. "Close," she said, kneeling down to Lily's height. "But I think Mrs. Claus is much kinder than I am." Lily shook her head seriously. "You seem nice to me." Madison's throat tightened, but she managed a smile. "Thank you, sweetheart." The morning unfolded in unexpected warmth. Madison found herself at Noah's small kitchen counter, sleeves rolled up, helping Lily roll cookie dough, while Noah prepared cocoa. The space was too small, too real. Nothing like the sterile perfection of her penthouse kitchen. Here, laughter and mess lived side by side. At one point, flour dusted Madison's cheek. Lily giggled and dabbed another spot just to see her reaction. Madison pretended to gasp dramatically, reaching for a spoon. "Oh, so it's war now?" The child squealed, running behind her father for protection. "Daddy, help." Noah chuckled. "You started it, kiddo." Madison froze for half a second, watching him smile. The way his eyes crinkled when he laughed. The quiet strength in the way he stood. Steady, present. Made her chest ache in a way she hadn't expected. She turned back to the dough quickly, trying to ignore the warmth creeping up her neck. "You two are dangerous together," she said lightly. "Team Bennett," Noah said with a smirk. "Unbeatable." She pressed a cookie cutter into the dough. "We'll see about that." By afternoon, the kitchen smelled like sugar and butter. The counters were a mess, but none of them cared. Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, curled under a blanket, her small hand still clutching a gingerbread man. Madison watched her for a long while before speaking. "She's extraordinary," she murmured. Noah followed her gaze. "Yeah, she's my reason for everything." Madison's voice softened. "She reminds me of me a long time ago." He turned to her. "Before you became who you are now?" She smiled faintly. "Before I forgot how to be someone else." There was a pause, the kind that invited truth. She leaned against the counter, eyes distant. "My mother loved Christmas," she began quietly. Every year she'd make these ridiculous gingerbread houses that always collapsed halfway through. I used to laugh at her for it. Her tone faltered. 5 years ago, I missed Christmas. I was closing a deal in London. She had a stroke that night. Noah didn't interrupt. He just listened, the way he always did. I came home 2 days later, she continued. I thought I'd be strong, practical. Instead, I walked into an empty house that still smelled like cinnamon and regret. She swallowed hard. I never baked again. Never celebrated. I thought, if I ignored the holiday, maybe the guilt would fade. Her eyes glistened, but she smiled faintly through it. It didn't. Noah's voice was quiet. Guilt never really goes away. We just learn to live beside it. She looked at him then, really looked. And for a heartbeat, it felt like the world around them disappeared. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, he said. It's just real. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It hummed with everything they weren't saying. Then a small rustle broke it. Lily stirred, blinking sleepily, and sat up. Miss Clark? Madison crouched beside her. Hey, sweetheart. Did we wake you? Lily shook her head, then reached into her small backpack. I made something for you. She pulled out a folded card covered in glitter and crooked stars. Madison took it carefully, her hands trembling slightly. On the front, in bright red crayon, it read, Merry Christmas, Miss Clark. Don't be sad anymore. For a moment, Madison couldn't speak. Her throat tightened, her vision blurred. She blinked fast, trying to hold it in, but it was useless. A tear slid down her cheek, then another. Hey, Noah said softly, stepping closer. You okay? Madison nodded, laughing weakly through the tears. I think so. She held up the card. No one's ever made me something like this before. Lily smiled, completely unfazed. Now you have to smile back. It's the rule. Madison laughed again, her voice breaking. Yes, ma'am. That evening, when the cookies had cooled and Lily was tucked into bed, Madison stood by the window, watching the snow fall outside. The city lights glowed below, muted and golden. Noah joined her quietly, 2 mugs of cocoa in his hands. You don't have to thank me, he said before she could speak. I wasn't going to, she teased softly, then smiled. Okay, maybe a little. He leaned against the wall beside her. You seemed happy today. I was. She looked down at her hands. I'd forgotten what that felt like. Noah studied her profile. The woman who once seemed untouchable, now standing in his small living room, wrapped in light and quiet. Maybe you just needed to be reminded, he said gently. Madison turned to him then, and for a moment her walls dropped completely. You know what I realized today? She whispered. I didn't lose love. I just forgot what it felt like. To be loved. The words hung between them, soft as snowfall. And as she looked at him, at the man who had never asked for anything yet somehow gave her everything, Madison Clark felt something inside her come back to life. For the first time in years, the world didn't feel so cold. The week after Christmas was quiet, the kind of stillness that feels both peaceful and heavy, like the calm after a long storm. The scandal had faded from the headlines, replaced by fresher gossip, newer chaos. But inside Madison Clark, something deeper was still stirring. She'd spent most of her days at home, helping Lily build snowmen in the yard, drinking too much cocoa, and learning what it meant to simply exist without a plan. Yet every time laughter echoed through the house, every time warmth brushed against the cold edges of her heart, she felt something else, too. A ghost from the past she hadn't yet faced. That ghost called her on a Thursday morning. The phone rang only once, before she saw the name flash across the screen. Edward Clark. Her father. She hadn't spoken to him in 5 years. Not since the night of her mother's funeral, when grief had turned into accusation, and he had looked at her with those cold gray eyes and said, You weren't there when she needed you. Maybe you don't belong here anymore. She almost didn't answer, but a part of her, the part that had changed since that snowy night with Noah, whispered that running away again would only keep the wound open. So, she picked up. Madison. His voice came through, smooth and practiced, the kind of voice that once commanded boardrooms. You sound well. She said nothing for a long moment. Why are you calling, Dad? A sigh. Can I call my daughter without needing a reason? She almost laughed. You could, but you never do. There was silence on the line, heavy, telling. Then he spoke again, his tone shifting to business. I heard about your situation. The press has been ruthless. You didn't deserve that. I'm fine, she said, though they both knew it wasn't true. I'm sure you are. He paused. Listen, I've been thinking. You built Clark & Co. from the ground up. You have vision, determination. It's time you came home, to Clark Global. You belong where you started. Clark Global? She repeated, disbelief edging into her tone. You want me to come back? After you threw me out? Edward sighed, weary. That was years ago. We both said things we didn't mean. You've proven yourself now. The board respects you. You could take over when I retire. It's what your mother would have wanted. The mention of her mother hit like a cold wind. Madison gripped the phone tighter. Don't, she said softly. Don't use her to justify this. Her father's voice hardened. Madison, you've always been emotional. It's your weakness. I'm offering you a chance to reclaim your legacy. She closed her eyes. There was a time when those words would have pulled her in, when ambition was the only language she spoke. But now, after everything, they just sounded empty. No, she said quietly. What? I said no. I don't want your company. Or your legacy, he scoffed. And what do you want then? To play house with that employee of yours? To bake cookies and throw away everything you've built? Madison's reply came calm, certain and steady. What I want, she said, is to be someone my mother would have been proud of. And I finally am. There was a pause on the other end, the kind that said more than any argument could. Money, power, control. She continued. They were never love, Dad. They were just ways to feel less alone. But I've found something better than all of that. Kindness. The kind that doesn't expect anything in return. Her father's breath caught, but he didn't speak. Madison smiled faintly, even through the tears forming in her eyes. Take care of yourself, she said softly. Goodbye. And then, for the first time in 5 years, she hung up. Not out of anger, but peace. That evening, snow fell again. Slow, thick, endless. Madison stood by the window of her apartment, watching the flakes catch the light. Every reflection in the glass seemed to whisper a memory she was finally ready to let go of. But there was one thing she couldn't let go of. One person. Before she could talk herself out of it, she grabbed her coat, scarf, and gloves and stepped into the night. Noah was cleaning up the kitchen when he heard the knock. It was soft at first, almost hesitant. When he opened the door, the cold air rushed in, along with her. She stood there, cheeks flushed pink, snowflakes tangled in her hair. Her eyes glistened beneath the streetlight, reflecting something between exhaustion and hope. Hey? She said, her voice trembling. I didn't mean to just show up again. He smiled gently. You have a habit of doing that. I know. She laughed weakly. It's terrible manners. No, he said quietly. It's starting to feel like tradition. Madison's laugh faded into something softer. I needed to see you, she admitted. I talked to my father today. Noah's brow furrowed. That must have been difficult. It was. She took a shaky breath. He offered me everything I used to want. Control, status, the company. I said no. He studied her face, seeing both pain and pride woven together. And how do you feel about that? Free, she said simply. Like I finally stopped running from the wrong things. Snowflakes melted on her lashes as she looked up at him. I realized something, Noah. I've spent years trying to prove I deserved love, by being perfect, successful, powerful. But love isn't something you earn. It's something you give. He didn't answer right away. He just stepped closer, his breath visible in the cold air between them. You sound like someone who's finally home, he said softly. Her voice broke. Maybe I am. For a moment, neither moved. The wind howled faintly, tugging at her scarf. Then, without hesitation, Noah reached out and pulled her into his arms. The embrace was wordless, but full, the kind of warmth that felt like truth. She buried her face in his chest, breathing in the faint scent of pine and safety. His hands pressed gently against her back, steady, certain. "Welcome home," he whispered against her hair. The words shattered whatever walls she had left. She closed her eyes, tears slipping free, not from sadness this time, but from the quiet relief of finally belonging somewhere that wasn't built on fear. They stood there for a long while, the snow swirling around them, the world fading into white. Two souls who had spent years lost in ambition, guilt, and loneliness now stood exactly where they were meant to be. Not in some grand office, not under flashing lights, but here, in the small, imperfect space of a man who'd taught her what love really meant. And as the snow fell heavier, blanketing everything in sight, Madison Clark realized this was her second Christmas miracle. Not the kind wrapped in glitter and gifts, but the kind that begins with forgiveness and ends with coming home. The first snow of the new year fell just as the city lights began to glow, blanketing the streets in silver. Inside the grand ballroom of the Clark & Cumberland Christmas Charity Gala, chandeliers sparkled above a sea of glittering gowns and dark suits. It was the kind of event where power wore perfume, where smiles hid ambition, and where Madison Clark had once felt most at home. But tonight felt different. Tonight, she wasn't here to celebrate success. She was here to let go of it. Noah stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, hands in his pockets, trying not to draw attention. He wasn't used to this world, the tuxedos, the champagne, the flash of cameras. But Madison had asked him to come, and something in her voice told him it mattered. When she finally appeared on stage, the room fell silent. She wore a deep emerald dress that shimmered under the lights, her hair swept back elegantly. Yet it wasn't her beauty that silenced them. It was her presence. Calm, poised, different. Noah's heart beat faster as he watched her step up to the microphone. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady but soft. "First, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, not just for Clark & Co., but for the children's hospitals and families your generosity will help this season." Polite applause followed. Madison smiled faintly, but there was a hint of vulnerability in her eyes. She paused, glancing toward the far end of the ballroom, where Noah stood. Their eyes met. Just for a second, the world seemed to narrow down to that single point. Then, she turned back to the crowd. "5 years ago," she said slowly, "I lost my mother on Christmas." A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. Madison had never spoken about her personal life in public before. "For a long time after that," she continued, "I thought the only way to survive pain was to build walls. Around my heart, around my life. I convinced myself that success could replace connection, that achievement could replace affection." She took a breath, her voice trembling slightly. "But I was wrong. Because love isn't a distraction from life's purpose. It is life's purpose." The room had gone utterly still. Even the photographers had lowered their cameras. "This year," she said, her voice growing stronger, "I found something my mother tried to teach me, not through her words, but through the way she loved, compassion, forgiveness, humanity." Madison smiled then, soft and real. "And because of that, I'm stepping down as CEO of Clark & Cumberland effective tonight." Gasps filled the room. Board members exchanged bewildered looks. Madison continued calmly. "The company will go on. In better hands, I'm sure. But I've realized that what I built was never meant to be a fortress. It was meant to be a bridge, and it's time I walk across it." Her gaze drifted back toward Noah again. "There's more to life than winning. Sometimes the greatest victory is learning how to love again." For a moment, no one moved. Then one by one, people began to clap. It wasn't polite applause this time. It was something deeper, heavier, genuine. Madison stepped back from the microphone, her heart pounding. The lights dimmed. The music swelled softly. And as she descended the steps from the stage, she caught sight of Noah. He hadn't clapped. He just stood there, his eyes glistening with something that looked like pride, and something else she didn't dare name. The crowd melted into conversation again. Madison weaved her way through it, ignoring the congratulations, the confusion, the curious stares. Her focus was on one person. Noah waited by the doors, hands still in his pockets, snowflakes catching in his hair from the open balcony behind him. When she reached him, she stopped just short, close enough to feel his warmth against the chill of the air. "You really did it," he said quietly. "I had to," she replied. It was time. He tilted his head slightly. "You sure about that? The Madison Clark I knew never gave up control without a fight." She smiled faintly. Maybe that's because the Madison you knew didn't understand what control was costing her. Snow began to drift inside through the open doors, soft, silent, glowing under the ballroom lights. She stepped closer, her voice low, intimate. "Can I ask you something? Anything. Can I start over?" She paused, eyes searching his. "With you?" For a moment, the world stopped. Noah looked at her, really looked. The woman who once lived behind glass walls now stood before him, vulnerable and unguarded, her heart in her hands. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just took one slow step forward, closing the distance between them. His hand came up, brushing a snowflake from her cheek. "Madison," he whispered. "You already have." The music from inside faded into a hush. Outside, the city lights shimmered like 1,000 tiny stars. And then, as if drawn by something inevitable, he kissed her. It wasn't rushed or hesitant. It was the kind of kiss that carried every unspoken word they'd ever shared. Forgiveness, gratitude, love. The ballroom doors had never fully closed. The guests inside caught sight of them beneath the falling snow, two silhouettes framed by light and winter. Someone began to clap, softly at first, then louder, until the sound filled the entire hall. But Madison didn't hear the applause. Neither did Noah. For them, there was only the warmth of that moment, the snow melting against their skin, the world fading into stillness, the quiet certainty that they had both found something far more precious than success or redemption. When they finally pulled apart, she was laughing softly, tears glinting in her eyes. "You know," she said, breathless, "I've made hundreds of speeches in my life, but that one was for you." He smiled, resting his forehead against hers. "Then you should know," he murmured. "You didn't have to say a word." The orchestra inside began to play again, a slow melody that wrapped around the night like a blessing. Madison looked out over the city, her city, and for the first time, it didn't feel like something she had to conquer. It just was. Noah slipped his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close as snow swirled gently around them. This time, she didn't resist the feeling. She let it sink in. The peace, the belonging, the love that had quietly waited for her to find it again. And as laughter and music rose behind them, Madison Clark finally understood that the brightest lights weren't the ones on stage, but the ones we find when we stop running and simply let ourselves be seen. Snow had returned to Chicago, soft, glittering, and endless, as if the heavens themselves remembered the night everything had changed. It had been 1 year since the gala. 1 year since Madison Clark had stepped down from her empire and stepped into a life she never knew she wanted. The world had moved on, new CEOs, new scandals, new headlines. But for Madison, time had slowed into something gentler. Now on Christmas Eve, laughter filled a small house on Maple Street. The kind of laughter that made walls feel warmer. "Careful with that star." "Kiddo," Noah Bennett said, steadying the ladder as Lily stretched on her toes, trying to place the golden topper onto the tree. "I got it, Daddy," she announced proudly, though the star wobbled dangerously. Madison giggled from across the room, holding a box of ornaments. "Maybe the star wants to be creative this year," she teased. Lily grinned. "Like Miss Clark?" Madison raised an eyebrow. "Is that your way of saying crooked?" The little girl shrugged. "Maybe?" Noah laughed, shaking his head. "You two are trouble." The house smelled of cinnamon and vanilla. A record played softly in the background. A crackly old version of Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. Outside, the world was blanketed in snow, the porch light glowing like a tiny star. This wasn't the life Madison once imagined. No penthouse views, no staff, no noise of ambition echoing through marble halls. Just a small kitchen, a warm fire, and the sound of love living freely. And somehow, it was more than enough. Later that evening, after Lily had fallen asleep under a mountain of blankets, Madison sat by the fireplace flipping through a small, worn notebook that Noah had handed her earlier. The title written on the front in his neat handwriting read, "The Snowlight Promise." She opened it carefully, fingers tracing the first line. Once upon a winter, there was a woman who had forgotten how to believe in magic. And then, one Christmas night, someone reminded her that even broken hearts can glow when touched by kindness. Her breath caught as she read on. The story was theirs, told in his quiet, honest voice. Every page carried pieces of them. The night in the snow, the coffee in the office, the fight, the laughter, the love that grew not from perfection, but from forgiveness. By the time she reached the last page, tears shimmered in her eyes. She looked up at Noah, sitting across from her with that small, knowing smile that still made her heart skip. "You wrote this for me?" she whispered. He shrugged lightly. "It's not much." Madison shook her head. "It's everything." He smiled, but there was something else in his eyes. A quiet anticipation, a secret waiting to unfold. He stood and walked to the small shelf near the tree, picking up a snow globe she hadn't noticed before. Inside it, a miniature Christmas village sparkled beneath falling glitter. "Do you remember last Christmas?" he asked softly, turning the globe in his hands. "The night it snowed so hard you could barely see the road?" Madison laughed. "How could I forget? You carried me to your car like some kind of hero out of a Hallmark movie." He smiled at that. "Yeah, I think that was the night everything started." He wound the base of the snow globe, and a soft melody began to play. Silent night, slow and tender. He set it gently in her hands. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Shake it," he said. She did, and then gasped. As the snow swirled inside, a small velvet box appeared, hidden at the base of the miniature house. Her heart froze. "Noah," she whispered. He took the globe from her trembling hands, opened the tiny box, and pulled out a simple gold ring. Elegant, understated, glowing in the firelight. "This isn't a proposal," he said quietly, his voice trembling just enough to betray his emotion. Madison blinked, confused. "It's not?" He smiled, stepping closer. "No, it's a promise." Her breath caught. "It's a promise," he continued, "that no one in this house will ever spend Christmas alone again. Not you, not me, not Lily, because this..." He gestured around them. "This is home. And I never want you to forget that." Madison's tears spilled over, soft and unstoppable. She reached for his hand, her voice breaking. "You're impossible, you know that?" "Maybe," he whispered, smiling through his own tears. "But you love me anyway." She laughed, the sound raw and real. "I do." He slid the ring onto her finger, and for a moment, everything in the world stilled. The snow outside, the firelight flickering, even her heartbeat. All of it seemed to hold its breath around them. Then, softly, he said, "Merry Christmas, Madison." She looked up at him, eyes shimmering. "Merry Christmas, Noah." The clock ticked past midnight. Outside, snow continued to fall, each flake catching the light like a secret wish. Madison stood by the window, gazing out at the quiet street. Lily's laughter echoed faintly from her dreams in the next room. Noah wrapped his arms around Madison's waist from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "You know," she whispered, "I used to think Christmas was just pain wrapped in lights, a reminder of everything I'd lost." He kissed her temple. "And now?" She turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes. "Now it's everything I've found," he smiled. "Then I guess the snowlight did its job." She laughed softly. "The snowlight?" "That's what Lily calls it," he said. "The way snow glows when the world's quiet, like it's keeping promises for us." Madison smiled, resting her head against his. "Then let's never stop believing in it." Outside, The snow light shimmered across their little house, a beacon against the dark. Inside, warmth bloomed in every corner, in every heartbeat, in every memory they were still creating. For the first time in years, Madison Clark, once the untouchable CEO, once the woman who forgot how to feel, had everything she'd never known she needed. Not perfection. Not power. Just love, laughter, and the quiet magic of never being alone again. And as the snow continued to fall, soft and endless, the promise held true. A promise written not in words, but in the light of every Christmas yet to come. Snow drifted gently outside the window, the kind that falls in slow motion, silent, endless, almost sacred. Inside the small house on Maple Street, the lights from the Christmas tree twinkled softly, reflecting in Madison Clark's eyes as she sat on the couch, her head resting against Noah Bennett's shoulder. Lily's soft breathing echoed from the next room, the kind of peaceful sound only children make when the world feels safe again. The fire had burned low, its glow pulsing like a steady heartbeat in the quiet. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't empty, and it was full of everything they'd survived, everything they'd learned, everything they'd found in each other. Noah reached over, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "You're quiet," he murmured. Madison smiled faintly. "Just thinking." "About?" She looked toward the snow outside, her voice soft. "How strange life is. A year ago, I thought Christmas was a cruel joke. Now it's the night that gave me everything I never knew I needed." Noah's gaze softened. "You know what I think?" "What?" "That maybe it wasn't luck. Maybe it was just kindness finding its way back." She turned to him, eyes shimmering in the firelight. "Kindness?" He nodded. "You saved yourself the moment you let someone help you. That's how it starts, you know? One small act of kindness. It changes everything." Madison let the words sink in. Kindness, the very thing she'd once dismissed as weakness, had been the quiet thread weaving her back together. The night he found her, the scarf he left behind, Lily's handmade card, all of it had built a bridge back to her heart. She took a deep breath. "I used to believe success meant never needing anyone. But now, I think the bravest thing I ever did was let someone stay." Noah smiled. "Then Merry Christmas to bravery," she laughed softly. "And to love?" he nodded. "And to love." The snow thickened outside, blanketing the world in white silence. Through the window, a street lamp flickered, casting a soft halo over the frost-covered glass. Madison's voice broke the quiet again, but this time, it carried a gentle certainty. "You know, I used to wait for miracles, big ones, the kind that fix everything, but I think I finally understand something." "What's that?" Noah asked. "Miracles aren't loud," she said. "They don't crash through the door or fall from the sky. Sometimes they just knock quietly and wait for you to open." He tilted his head, studying her. "Like you did that night?" She smiled, eyes glistening. "Like you did." He didn't answer. He just reached for her hand and held it, not as a promise of forever, but as something simpler, truer. "I'm here. You're not alone." Hours later, after the fire had dimmed and the house had gone still, Madison found herself standing by the window again. The night was hushed, the snow still falling, each flake like a whisper from heaven. Her reflection looked different now. Softer, lighter. For the first time in years, she saw not the CEO, not the survivor, but simply a woman who had found her way home. She thought of her mother, of the Christmases they used to share, of the laughter and warmth that had once filled the rooms of her childhood. And then, she thought of now, of this small home, this quiet peace, this love born from brokenness. A tear slipped down her cheek, but it wasn't from sadness. It was gratitude, pure and deep. Behind her, Noah's sleepy voice murmured, "You okay?" She turned, smiling softly. "More than okay." He extended his hand, eyes still half closed. "Come back to bed. It's late." She walked over, taking his hand and whispering, "Merry Christmas, Noah." He smiled without opening his eyes. "Merry Christmas, Madison." And for the first time, Those words didn't ache. They healed. Christmas isn't always about miracles. Sometimes, it's about the quiet moments, the small, ordinary acts of kindness that find us when we've stopped believing. A man stopping his car on a snowy night. A message that said, "Please help me." A cup of coffee, a child's handmade card, a scarf left behind. These aren't coincidences. They're reminders that even in the coldest nights, love can still find a way to glow. Because the truth is, the world doesn't change in grand gestures. It changes when we choose to care, even when no one's watching, even when it hurts. If you've ever felt alone on Christmas, remember this. Somewhere, someone is waiting for you to step through your own snowfall, to let the light in. Because maybe, just maybe, you are someone's Christmas miracle. If you believe in the quiet magic of kindness, leave AI in the comments below. Because who knows, you might be the snowlight in someone else's story. And as the final words fade, the screen fills with the image of their home, the small house glowing under the snowfall, laughter echoing faintly from inside. No grand finale, no thunderous music, just warmth, love, and the gentle truth that the greatest miracles are the ones born from kindness, and the courage to let it in. Thank you so much for listening to today's story, a journey of love, kindness, and quiet miracles beneath the winter sky. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Every message from you gives us the strength to keep creating more heartfelt stories. Please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next story from Vale of Hearts, a place where love finds its way through the quietest corners of the soul.